Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section and I pick from those each week. Again, there's way more questions being asked every week than I could possibly answer, and I appreciate that because your participation is greatly appreciated, and I try to pick ones that are kind of relevant or whatever or haven't answered in a while, and then there's just way more. So again, thank you for asking. Don't be offended if I'm not answering your question. That's not on purpose at all. It's just, this is a lot of questions, and again, appreciate it. I was at, Holly's out here with me, by the way. I don't know that you'll be able to see her with the camera at the angle that it is. I am literally surrounded, number one, by plants. I've got all kinds of new plants from the future plants from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is a new variegated osmanthus. It's really, really beautiful. I've got a couple dwarf red buds that I'll be showing off pretty soon. They're absolutely amazing. More of Denny Werner's incredible breeding work. I've got an Aspidistra here. This one's not available yet, but look how much variegation is actually in that plant. Those of you in cold areas can use this as a house plant. In warm areas, we can put it in the ground. I actually went up on the stage and accepted an award. This plant won an award up in Cultivate in Columbus, Ohio this past weekend. Had nothing to do with this plant other than the fact that I was the person that was available in the Southern Living Plant Collection space at the time that it was awarded a Retailer's Choice Award. So I went up and talked about it to the group at Cultivate and then accepted the award. I was at Cultivate. Again, Holly's out here with me. I don't know if I finished that thought before I moved on to another one. I was at Cultivate this past weekend. I got there on Thursday afternoon. It was a whirlwind. I never even saw the show floor. It was so crazy. I ended up on the, speaking 3 times. There were a lot of other YouTubers that, or a lot of other gardening YouTubers, I guess, there. Jenny and Jerry were there. I took a photo with them, but they took it, so they have it. So I can't show you that one. It was on their Instagram. Jessica from Roots and Refuge. Janie from Dig, Plant, Water, Repeat. I think that's the correct way to say her channel. It's a great channel name. She's out in Sacramento. Talked to her for a while. And then her channel's grown really quickly. Who else am I missing? And then Erin, the Impatient Gardener, she was actually there speaking with 2 of my other friends. So I had 3 people I knew on the stage. I came in, sat in the back row in this giant ballroom because I had time at that moment to come in and listen to the 3 of them speak. And my photo came up on the screen with a photo that Erin and I took together last year when I was up in Wisconsin. And And I was looking down at my phone at the time, and Aaron goes, if Jim Putnam will look up from his phone, and I'm literally in the back of the room. The whole entire ballroom turns around and looks at me. I was, in fact, looking at my phone at the time. It felt like the 8th grade again when I got called out by teachers. But it was super funny. It was super funny. We took a photo together. That one happens to be on my phone. So it was an enjoyable event, but I stayed busy the entire time between speaking and running into friends and my work with the Southern Living Plant Collection, Encore Azaleas. I go there, usually help them set up and break down for these shows, different places in the country. So far this year, been in Baltimore for them, in California for them, and then this event in Columbus, and I've got 2 more events before the year's over with them. I usually come in and help set up and break down. This time I snuck in after most of the setup was done and snuck out before it was broken down because I had Chelsea. I'm a Chelsea soccer fan, and they were here in Chapel Hill on Wednesday. As you're watching this on Sunday, this previous Wednesday, they were here, so I had to get out early, so I missed setup and breakdown. But I'm usually there there's a lot of gardening, a lot of trade magazines for horticulture, and then retail magazines for horticulture that come around and they want to know what's new and so I do a lot of those. Talking to the media for Southern Living Plant Collection and Encore Azaleas. And it's a lot of stuff that's coming like 2 years from now and that kind of thing you're talking about. But it kept me close to the space, and then I literally just never saw the show floor. But anyway, enough of that. But it was a fun event, and lots of people that you guys may watch their channels or have seen their channels on YouTube. A lot of those folks were there as well. Let's get to some questions. Let's see. Somebody asked about hellebore aphids. So they said they had aphids on their hellebores. So there are several aphids that will get on hellebores, but most of the time it's actually the hellebore aphid. There's actually an aphid that just, goes with hellebores. I always talk about plants being more susceptible to to these types of things if they're under some sort of stress. So do always ask. There's literally, I mean, if I listed all the questions that were aphids, whiteflies, whatever they are for this particular, we'd be here for 100 years. I mean, this is the time of year that the insects kind of take over the world. You hope you have birds and good insects out there in your garden that can kind of keep things in balance, but some things do, get out of balance. So ask yourself, always go through a checklist. Am I pushing the boundaries of this plant? Is it just hotter this summer than it normally is? Is it drier than it normally is? Is it wetter than it normally is? Have I pushed it too hard with fertilizer? Are there weeds around it that are hiding places for insects? Are there, go through the list of questions. Is it an area that's mulched well? Is there grass competing with it? Is there, are they newly planted things in a very stressful situation because you had existing plants there that are rooted out into that space and they're competing with older, more established plants? Go through that checklist in your mind. If you're having, these types of problems. And again, sometimes it's just the thing doesn't want to be in your garden. It doesn't want the clay soil. It doesn't want the sandy soil. It doesn't want the heat. It doesn't want, you're just pushing the boundaries in some way or another on something. Or this particular summer is different than others and you'll see some insect problems run amok a bit. But hellebore aphids, one of the main controls for me for hellebore aphids is that I always cut my hellebores back in February here. So or January actually, before that new growth starts, I always take the leaves completely back to the ground. And so all the new growth comes out of the center and I get to see the flowers without all those old leaves on it. The way that hellebore aphids operate, like a lot of aphids, is they lay eggs in the early fall. They overwinter on the plant until spring, and then during the growing season they actually do live births. So they can cycle really, really quickly and make lots and lots and lots and lots of aphids over a short period of time. And then toward the end of summer, as the days get shorter, they start laying eggs again that overwinter on the plant. So cutting that foliage back to the ground and disposing of it will help at least reduce some of the numbers. And you can use dormant oil in the winter time if you want to on them as well. That would be one way to do it as well if you wanted to spray something. But again, all the questions I got, I can answer the same way on all of these types of insect related problems, these little sucking insects that, is the plant out of place? Is it getting enough air movement? Does it get, for some problems it might be that it needs morning sun to dry the leaves off before, later in the day. So you might see a crepe myrtle with some problems on the west side of a building so that it doesn't get any sun on it. You think, well, it's in a lot of sun because the afternoon it's just getting cooked, but it spends an extra 3 hours in the shade every morning and the leaves stay wet. And so that can, offer up an opportunity for powdery mildew or something like that. So just go through a checklist in your mind and say, why is this plant always so vulnerable to these issues before you break out the sprays or just, or you may be able to move something around in your garden and find that it's less susceptible to the problems. Okay, anyway. So somebody wanted to replace some knockout roses. They've lost a lot to rosette, and there's a constant list of questions about rosette. It's kind of strange because it was I was probably, as many as 12 years ago, I saw it for the first time over here at the fairgrounds here in Raleigh, and then I saw it over at the Greensboro Farmers Market on Sandy Ridge Road. Pulling in one day with my truck because I had a little retail spot there, and all of their knockout roses were, you could see rosette on them. So it's been around a while, and Raleigh's just overwhelmed with it. It seems like now it's moved out further and further, so I'm getting more and more rose rosette questions every week. Somebody's just replacing. They had to tear out like 30 of them or something like that. I got one other question about somebody asked if they could save one. No, definitely not. Once your plant has rosette, okay, I have to say this, it's no longer about you anymore. Okay, at the point where your roses have rosette, it's about saving your neighbor's roses. So you're doing your neighbors a favor by pulling them out. And I see this all over the city where I see, the first year you typically see like one weird witch's broom or two weird witch's brooms growth on them, just this strange reddish growth that happens on the top of them. The second year, it's more throughout the plant, and you might see 20 spots on the plant where it has some rosette, and you start to see the plant really suffering. And the third year, they just typically die or come close to dying the third year. Over that period of time, it's been able to spread this disease by an aerified mite. A mite comes along, does damage to the plant, minor damage to the plant, honestly. It's not the mite's fault, really. Then it's an aerified mite. So the wind picks it up, it lands on another rose, and as soon as it starts to chew it, it's taking this disease that it picked up on the one and moving it to another. So if you have a disease, an incurable disease in a plant, again, it's no longer about you, you know what I mean? And I know it was expensive, and I know these decisions are very hard because a lot of these newer patented plants, they were not inexpensive. This was not a minor investment. So I understand all of those things. But if you have a disease that spreads that way, you're protecting your neighbor's plants and others. And I think we'll see some distance form between the remaining ones, and we'll probably see less of it. But currently there were so many sold that it's basically like playing connect the dots everywhere. Basically every garden, not every garden, but a lot of gardens have planted roses, because we've seen these low maintenance shrub roses were really easy to get a lot of color out of, and they're resistant to black spot, and they were resistant to a lot of things, but they're not resistant to this one particular thing. And it was like playing connect the dots with the roses. So anyway, enough of that. But this person was looking to replace them, and then they gave me a list of like Indian hawthorns and Laura petalum and things that they like. So I'm assuming they're down in the south. You can replace them with anything you want. I recommend, I look at it as an opportunity. I know it's a painful 30 plants to remove, but now you have the opportunity to, through either my YouTube channel or some other YouTube channel or some local garden, or, a landscape designer, or, looking at neighbors' plants, to really go out and do something new and different. So, think about it as an opportunity. And I don't know that there's a list of things I can recommend, because my whole channel is plants for your area, for the southeast. So pretty much anything, that will grow in my garden. If you look at that 9 video tour that I did recently, you can see literally everything in those videos would be available, or be okay in your garden. Okay, let's see. So somebody has a Jane Magnolia that gets powdery mildew. Should they limit up to get some more air movement? Yeah, you can do that, and you can also thin it out a little bit as well. They grow they grow so full and bushy that any kind of air movement that you could get inside of the plant may be helpful. May be also helpful as it gets bigger. It was not that long in the ground. As it gets bigger, it may get up into some sunlight a little earlier in the morning. I don't know where it's sitting now. It might be blocked, like I was talking about. Some of our mildew issues can just be because the water, the dew is lingering on them longer in the morning than it is on other things. But yeah, any air movement that you can get around it will be helpful. But pretty much every one of the little girl magnolias is what they're called. All the ones that have girl names. Those are, most of them I'll see some mildew on them, especially by this time of summer when the heat and humidity really kicks in. So don't think that you're failing somehow. It's not abnormal to have some mildew on them. Let's see. So somebody wanted to know about overwintering rooted cuttings. They went out, rooted a bunch of cuttings in the garden, which was the perfect timing. June 15th to about August 15th is the perfect time to be doing some cuttings, and I actually need to be doing some cuttings out here. Haven't done it yet. Wanted to know how to overwinter them in zone 5. I think that it's a really hard, I don't know what you rooted. So first of all, I don't know what you've rooted. If you've rooted any leafy evergreens, those are the ones that are a particular concern, right? Because they're marginal maybe in your area already, and now having them above ground instead of in the ground is probably reducing another zone or more. So you're like your cuttings are like in zone 4. So you have to ask yourself, of the things that you've done cuttings on, how many of them are hardy in zone 3 or 4? Those things are probably just fine. They can just be put together really close somewhere. You can throw some, leaves over them, or a sheet over them when it's, for part of the winter. The things that are only zone 5 hardy probably need to be in some sort of space that you can heat during the night on the worst of the winter. So they can, they can take some cold. So I wouldn't worry, I wouldn't be stressing about it every night of the whole winter. But the nights that are cold, that are, zone 5 kind of nights, they need to be up on, in a kitchen, sitting on a towel on the floor, or somewhere where, they're actually protected. If that, you think about when soil freezes solid, there's no water that can get up into the top of the plant. So if you get air movement across the top of that, it doesn't matter what it is, it can't get water up in the top. So water is being taken out of the top of the plant and it can't replace it. The bigger the mass, the less likely it is to be a problem. So in a big giant container, it's less of a problem than it is in but we're talking about rooted cuttings, newly, just taking a piece off, like I just took off this sky pencil, like this. That's the kind of thing that, that's gonna die easily in a small rooted cutting. So if I had rooted sky pencil hollies like this, any night it was below 20 degrees, I'd probably just bring the tray in the house and keep them in trays through the winter. If you planted some people would say, well, if you plant them out into larger containers, maybe get some growth on them. Well, now you've quadrupled the amount of space that you have to protect for the winter. So what I always did at my nursery is we rooted stuff January 15th to August 15th, and then we overwintered them in the trays because they're much easier to protect. I can protect 50 plants. It's only 12 inches by 18 inches, okay, for 50 plants. If I prodded them into larger containers, I'd need 4 times the greenhouse space, 5 times the greenhouse space, and I'd be protecting all of that, and I wouldn't get any growth on them. So we didn't plant things until March. Anyway, I hope that helps. If it's marginal in your area, I would bring it inside probably on the worst nights of the winter, and then get it back outside. You need them to stay dormant. Okay, that was a lot of words, probably. Let's see. So somebody said their seedlings never take off in clay soil, and that's probably, again, any annual video that I've ever talked about planting annuals in your garden. So let's say this person's planting zinnias or, whatever the heck it is. They're planting as seed, some sort of sunflower, something like that. If you're doing an annual seed in the garden of that you're trying to get one season of big time performance out of, that's a space that you probably want to amend. I typically will put down a small layer of compost in that space to allow, to improve that soil. I think those are spaces that you want to improve. It's not to say that there aren't things that sometimes you get lucky, and you throw something out on your clay soil and it comes up and it looks beautiful for the summer. But it's a much bigger guarantee if you actually prep that space and have it be where you can get the most out of them for that season. So each year that I'm putting in annuals on these borders around this future patio and that turf area out in the back, I'm putting a little extra compost down each time, and then my annuals just explode with growth out here during the season. But that, just relying on throwing seed out on clay soil and having it perform well is a maybe, and I'm not a big fan of maybes, just because I spent so much time in the nursery business. I like if I'm going to put effort into something that I want to get something out of it at the end. So prep it in clay soils for your seeds. So somebody's neighbor's Ruby Falls magnolias coming through their fence, and they want to propagate it. You won't have. I don't think you'll have any success rooting cuttings on those red buds. I think that that Ruby Falls, if you'll look over the fence, is actually grafted. So what they do is they take seedling Cercis canadensis, probably our native red bud, and grow those out, and then they cut those off and they actually graft the Ruby Falls onto it, or Golden Falls, or Flamethrower, or any of these new red buds that everyone loves. And this one right here that I'm not talking about yet, that people are going to love even more. This is a dwarf purple cultivar. You guys, I'll talk about it. It's a little ways from having numbers out there in the nursery world, although there are some that are starting to be ready now. I have a green and a purple version of that plant. They're grafted, so I don't think you'll have any real luck with rooting them. The pieces that are coming through, it's a fairly specialized plant for how it's grown. And then they have to be staked up too. You have to stake it up to the height you want to keep it, because all the limbs actually weep down on it. So if you were just to root it and it was only this tall, it would just be a ground cover. Let's see. And then again, I'm going to go back and just say I wrote down aphids, whiteflies, all of these questions about insects that I got last week, which is a lot. Go through that checklist of, why is my plant more vulnerable? Is it, sometimes it's cultivar based. I had, and I think I'm sure I've said this before, I tried 2 different yellow butterfly bushes over the years in my nursery, and every single time they got mites. All of my butterfly bushes in a nursery setting are very susceptible to mites. We push them very, very hard trying to finish them quick, and they will respond and grow very quickly for you, but it leaves them particularly vulnerable to mites. The plants, although growing and looks fantastic, is actually under a lot of stress from being asked to grow that fast, and so they become susceptible to mites. These yellow ones just got absolutely destroyed by mites in the nursery, and I just kind of came to the conclusion that there's a cultivar related issue. And I've heard, this is one of those funny things that I've been doing this for so long that when I'm at a place like Cultivate and somebody says, we really love this plant, it's great, but man, we have mites on it constantly. This is from a place that's been observing the plant or whatever, and I'm back in my mind, I go, yeah, well, there's some cultivars are just weak. We can cross 2 plants together and get this amazing thing, this new pink foliage or variegated foliage or this new flower type or something like that. It doesn't mean that those crossing those 2 things together, we got the vigorous growth trait, or we got the red flower trait, or we got the fast growing trait. But in the trade-off, we lost some other thing that plant needed to actually be healthy, right? And what you end up with is plants that are susceptible to mites. So it can be cultivar related too, that your plant's getting problems. But always go through the checklist in your mind of what is happening in this space that makes this plant more vulnerable here, and then take action according to that. Maybe try to do a little more summertime watering or whatever. Okay, let's see. So somebody has edgeworthia and it's suckering, and they want to know whether they can dig those suckers up. And should they plant them directly in the ground or into a pot? I'd probably put them in a pot, get them rooted out, and then overwinter them. They're pretty cold hardy. They'll lose their leaves in the winter. You can maybe have to bring it inside for a couple times during the winter, but I'd want to pot them, let them flush out next spring, and then put them in the ground in all likelihood. If you're in a particularly warm area, yeah, you could take one out, get some roots started on it, and go ahead and put it in the ground in the fall, probably with no problem. But for me, I'm just not a person who, I've grown millions of plants, literally millions of plants over the years, and I like to take as much chance out of something as I can. And so I would dig up the suckers, put them in a container, get them well established. You got another 2 months of growing time on them, and then protect them during the worst of the winter. And it's going to take very cold temperatures to damage a dormant edgeworthia. Bring it in the house 10 nights during the winter and you'll be fine. So somebody asked me, I've said I'm not a big giant fan of daylilies, and why? No particular reason. It's just a plant that's just out there everywhere, and so, for me, there's no plant that I dislike. So I think people think I dislike crepe myrtles. I don't dislike crepe myrtles, I just think they're overused. And so that's the same thing with something like daylilies for me. It's so common that it's been checked off the list for me from other people's gardens. I can see all the daylilies I'd ever want to see, right? I don't have to see them in my own garden. And then there's there's literally, I have a park near me that has hundreds of varieties of daylilies, and they're all labeled in the garden. And I've taken photos and put them on Instagram. It's nothing against the daylilies at all, other than they're just common, and I can go up the street and see them at someone else's garden. Although I do have that autumn minuet over here beside the fence, because autumn minuet gets 6 foot tall flower spikes that are fragrant on it, and it has this bird just flew right over my head, this really strappy foliage that's only about that tall with a flower spike that's taller than I am. This first year, the flower spike's here in the video, I think it was in the 9th video. It's blooming coming back home right now, and it's about, it'll be 7 feet tall next year. So it's an interesting one, right? It's different than every other one. That, for me, makes it interesting. But for you, if you love them, heck, this has nothing to do with me. So there is no, you know, my opinions are my opinions and your opinions are your opinions, and that's great. There's so many ornamental plants that we can all grow, and we should be. As many different things as we can possibly grow, that creates more balance and, you know, and more resiliency out in the world, the more species that are together. So has nothing to do with me. I like things that I don't see everywhere else, so that I can collect them in my own garden. Okay, let's see. So somebody's had a Japanese maple, top of it got damaged. They got a mail order Japanese maple. The top of it got damaged, and now they have green growth coming out from below the graft. Yeah, you definitely need to cut that off, and I don't know. If you don't have any of the growth of the original Japanese maple, it's probably a lost cause. You know, more bad news from Jim. I should have that shirt, more bad news from Jim. That would be a good one. But yeah, if you don't have any of the growth from the whatever cultivar of Japanese maple you bought coming, and you only have the green growth from the below the graft where it was, you know, the seedling that was used for it to be grafted on, then it may be a lost cause. I'd cut off all the green stuff below the graft, give it a month. If you don't see any growth coming from that top part that's remaining, then it's done for. So somebody asked the best time to cut an abelia to the ground to reset it. So if you had a giant abelia, grandiflora, or any leafy evergreen plant that's very vigorous, that loropetalum behind me might be an example of that. That sunshine ligustrum, the yellow right there, might be an example of that. When would you cut it to the ground to do a reset? So that's my thing, is that shrubs get to be about 20 years old, and then there's always this question, you know, what should I do with it? And I always give things a chance to reset. So I'll cut them to the ground. The best time to do it is late winter, early spring. You know, as you get towards your frost-free date, a little before your frost-free date, it's probably the best time of year to do it. But with an old established abelia, you could probably do it right now, and it would, you're not gonna kill that thing. In fact, it's gonna take you a while to kill that thing if you decide resetting it wasn't good enough. So you could do it now if you wanted to, and it wouldn't cause you any long-term problems at all. It's not the best time, and a lot of people are always asking me the best time to do something. The best time to do something would probably, to do that, but it might be March. Okay, so let's see. So somebody asked a good season for ordering online plants, and somebody answered it with a great answer, which is a lot of the really established online plant companies will send you things when it's the time to send them out in your area. So if you're, like as an example, if you're, you know, bored during the winter time and you're ordering from a place like Plant Delights online, or Plants by Mail, where I got a link below the video for Plants by Mail, you know, you can get them sent after your frost-free date. So figure out what your average last frost date is. For me, that's around April 15th. I wouldn't want to get anything mail order before then, except for things like dormant fruit trees or fruit or something like that, or bulbs back in the fall. You know, I wouldn't want to get anything with a lot of new growth on it and then unbox it and put it outside before my frost-free date. But a lot of the online retailers will send you stuff at the appropriate time. If you're ordering fall and winter, they won't ship them until about the time it is to plant them. If you're ordering woodies through the mail, like from Plants by Mail or Mr. Maple, you know, woody, like the Japanese maple we were just talking about, you can order those pretty much any time. Keep in mind the heat of the summer, you know, that's a lot of stress, right? We don't know how the plant's gonna be handled coming to you. I'm gonna ship it on Monday, and I'm gonna ship it where it's a 2 to 3 day, you know, lag time. I just don't know how that plant's going to be abused. I don't know how long it's going to sit in a truck in a parking lot while a guy eats lunch. I don't know. It's a live thing, and they're not necessarily set up the best, you know, for live things. So in the peak of the summer, I'd be careful. The rest of the year, I'd order woody plants, regardless if they're hardy in your area. I wouldn't want a herbaceous perennial flushed out and receive it in February for sure. So somebody, I always get the north side question. In the south, like where I am on the north side of the house over here is where it cooks during the summertime. The sun is actually tracking north of us, and it cooks over there. But then about 8 months out of the year, it's actually in the shade and can be a little wet. Honestly, every single time I get this question, any southerner who's living in the south is lean on native plants on the north side of your house, because they typically are just overall potentially more resilient to the kinds of heat you're going to have, the kind of cold you're going to have, the kind of changeable soils you're going to have, and that kind of thing. It's the one area that I've always said natives make a good choice. And look around your area again for those things in those tough spaces. Identify the north side of things, and then start looking at it and see what's performing well in your area. Is summer okay for cutting back Liriope? This is another one of those reset questions. Really the best time of year to do it again is in March or early April, right before they start to put on new growth. You don't want the new growth on the Liriope to start before you do it, but you want to keep the growth on them as long as possible. So sometime for us, maybe that's February. In Raleigh, a little bit north of me, it'd be just a hair later than that, but you can cut them back with you can run a lawnmower over them, you can do a weed eater on them, whatever you want to do. You could cut it back in the summer if you wanted to. It's not like we're going to start killing Liriope here. Another thing that's really difficult to kill, but I don't know if you're going to get the best response out of them coming back right now, because a lot of these plants are in a summer dormancy. They look okay out here. My annuals and my herbaceous perennials are still growing and they're blooming and they've got bees and pollinators all over them, but a lot of these shrubs, which look okay, are actually in a dormancy right now. And some things like Liriope probably are as well. Most of the growing they're going to do is in the spring and potentially in the fall when they're blooming. They bloom in late summer typically. But right now they probably won't put on a whole lot of growth. So it's going to be stressful. For me, I'm going to wait to do those until February or March for the best outcome. Somebody asked about, back to hellebore summer care. They get a lot of dieback on there. So this time of year, hellebores go into dormancy. They're dormant right now. This is a winter perennial. All of its growth starts in, 1st of February for us, and all of its growing is pretty much done by early summer. And then it goes into a summer dormancy where it kind of stays. Then we cut that foliage back around February. That's how I care for them. Hellebores are a dry shade perennial. When I say something is for dry shade, it doesn't mean you're never going to have to water it to get the best performance out of it. I think that's what a lot of people think about drought tolerant, means I'm never going to have to water it. That may be the case to keep them alive, but that probably is not the case to keep them thriving. Those are two different things. And so I would think that if you're getting to the point where they're not only going dormant, but there's a hawk that just flew up in a tree right here, that they're not only going dormant, but they're also, the leaves are actually declining back underground, then you probably need some additional water on them during the summertime. Somebody asked, what mulch do I use? I've got several different mulches out here. I've got some pine bark fines in my annual borders. I've got triple shredded hardwood mulch, which is just the bark of hardwood trees like oak or poplar or whatever that's ground up. And it's supposed to be ground 3 times. It used to be double shredded hardwood, and it looked the exact same as the new triple shredded hardwood. So I don't know if their machine got duller or they just wanted to charge more for it by calling it triple. I imagine it'll be called quadruple hardwood mulch at some point so that it can go up even more expensive. And then I've got wood chips in my paths, and I may put pine straw in the paths again at some point. I've had pine straw in the paths as well. So I use equal opportunity, but I think for my shrubs in the beds, I like a shredded hardwood mulch better than anything else. And that was part of the question. They have an expensive area to cover. If you've got just open space that's not planted, wood chips are the best thing. If you can get your hands on free wood chips or even pay for wood chips, they're still going to be cheap, less expensive than other things. They're reasonably easy to move. It's a fairly light material. But if you have a large area to cover and nothing planted there, wood chips would be my recommendation. So somebody asked how the serviceberry in the front garden's doing. Great. It was in the 8th of the 9 tour videos. If you want to go back and look at that one, it's doing fantastic out there. It's got a slight lean to it, so I need to restake it once more, and it does need a little bit of lightening. Not lightning. Definitely doesn't need lightning. I need to lighten the weight of the top of it again. I need to do some additional pruning on it again. It's still too wispy. But the plant itself looks great. So somebody has some Carex. They said it's in the full sun and it's not growing. two things about the question. One is it's fairly newly planted and it's not growing. So somebody tells me something's fairly newly planted and it's not growing or not performing. Well, that's just because you took it out of the container and slammed it in the ground and now it's stressed, which never any big deal. Don't judge anything. Be careful judging things 6 months after you put them in the ground. I mean, it's a big transition to go through into a new space, but then they said they're in a lot of sun, so that may actually be the issue as well. They do need part shade. Mine are about to be in the full sun, and they'll spend about 3 hours in it maybe, and then they're in the shade the rest of the day. So that's Overwintering Carex, the gold Carex. Again, it's in several of the tour videos in this garden. Why is the fountain not running? The only reason the fountain over here is not running is because I was out of town for 2.5 weeks going to the Gulf Coast, and then immediately went to Cultivate, and I've just had so many things going on that I actually drained it. I had it running before that, and then I was like, well, I'm gonna be out of town for like 4 weeks, and I don't want the thing to run out of water or anything like that while I'm gone and damage it in some way. So I drained it to keep any mosquitoes or anything from being in it. But that's the only reason. It's just schedule, and I didn't think it was a good idea to try to keep it running, or ask a neighbor or something to take care of my fountain. Let's see. So somebody asked about planting an Aspidistra into a large pot. This Aspidistra right here, I accepted an award for up in Cultivate. Had nothing to do with the plant. I just happened to be in the space when it won an award. It's called Tokyo Skies. They wanted to put it into a very large pot. So this is basically a quart container or 4-inch container right here. I'd be careful putting them in. These are plants that like to stay slightly on the dry side. These are great house plants for people in the north, and then great in the ground here. This is a small 4-inch container of this new one called Tokyo Skies. It'll be a year before these are available, before you guys will be able to find them, but that plant's gonna sell like crazy. I carried that thing through Cultivate show 2 times, for one was a speaking event and one when it won an award, and people stopped me constantly asking what it was. But they like to stay on the dry side, so if you're stepping them up in containers, I would step them up a little bit at the time and not go into a giant container, because it may end up staying too wet. So let's see. Somebody has hailstorm damage. That's just a wait and see. I had a massive hailstorm, and it was literally, I was about to sell the house, the old house. If you've been following the channel long enough, I had a different house before this house. And I had a hailstorm right before I put it on the market. My siding was damaged, plants were damaged, the place looked like a disaster. Only one plant was killed from it, but everything looked bad for a little while. And by the time I got my siding fixed and got the little bit of roof damage that I had fixed, the garden had pretty much recovered. So, just go out there and get cleaned up, and it'll recover on its own, but it is a pain, that's for sure. Let's see, so somebody got a beautyberry they received in the mail. They're in zone 7, want to know when to plant it. You could plant it now. I don't know how big it is. So I'm going to okay, if this is a little teeny tiny pot, you might put it into a slightly larger pot and just keep it there the rest of the summer, and then plant it next spring. Protect it a couple nights during the winter, like I've said earlier. If it's got some size on it, if it's a 4-inch pot or a gallon pot, you've got plenty of time for a beautyberry to get established and make it through the first winter. Shouldn't be any problem. Okay, so last question for this week. Somebody asked about advice on starting a nursery. And I do some consultations on this. If you're somebody who's thinking about starting a nursery, this is, I'm pretty good at this one. I do this, this channel, but outside of, what you guys see on this channel, I do videos for growers on how to grow some of the plants that's in the Southern Living Plant Collection. Literally, I've got a pile of plants around me that I'm working on those videos right now for them. And I do a lot, I do a lot of nursery consultation over the years. I'm definitely not the top expert, not even close, but I continue to learn. When I go to Cultivate, I got my listening ears on. There's some incredible growers across this country, and I try to learn from them as much as I can, and I'm observant when I'm in nurseries about what's growing well. So when I go to another nursery, and I'm asking them if I can film at their nursery and get something out of it. I can also sometimes go, I've seen that growing under a 50% shade cloth, and it, seems to be performing pretty well and maybe helpful in some way. So this is in my wheelhouse. And again, I've done consultations with folks who are interested in starting nurseries, and I can probably save you a lot of money from the amount of money you would spend. But my biggest piece of advice is two things. Number one, it would be very difficult to start a nursery for the love of plants, okay? If you're a person who loves plants and I want to start a nursery, you really, unfortunately, have to, at least a little bit, suspend your passion for plants, okay? Because it might make you make poor decisions about adding things to your nursery that no one else likes except for you, and so they don't sell. Right? We need to, at the point that you become a nurseryman or nurserywoman, these plants are widgets, okay? They're like any other thing that, anybody would manufacture, okay? And you've got to be able to put an investment on the ground and get the money back out of that investment, okay? So there's a little bit of suspending your love of plants, okay? You get to be outside, you get some of the things that are in your mind, but the one thing that has to leave your mind a little bit is you have to make objective decisions about what the heck it is you're growing, and then the second thing is you need to know who your customer is before you ever start the nursery. So are you going to grow plants for retail? Are you and sell them directly to people? Are you going to grow unusual thing and sell them on Etsy or Facebook Marketplace? Are you going to, the biggest area of opportunity out here now is supporting much larger nurseries. And so you take a nursery, and this is another thing I do, is some of the plants in like the Southern Living Plant Collection, something like a camellia can take an extra half a season or a season longer to grow. And they're not necessarily grown at the largest nurseries in the country. They're actually grown by another party and then bought in to the large nursery, and then they go to Lowe's or Home Depot or garden centers or wherever they go. There's a lot of third-party opportunity out there to step in and grow some things that maybe take a little while longer or slightly more specialized and make a deal and have them sold before you ever start the process. And so there's a lot of opportunity there supporting much larger nurseries in their operations, because they have a hard time sometimes with the things that grow slightly slower allocating space for those things. They want to get quick flip things, and then they save some space in their nurseries to bring things in from other nurseries and add those to their list and send them out. So there's an opportunity there. And then there's always an opportunity out there in the specialized nursery world, for doing retail or mail order or something like that. But that can take a little while. But again, there's this little bit of suspending your love of plants to make good business decisions that you have to do. And some people, I don't know, I want to start a nursery because I love plants. That one's unfortunately, so that's always the first question I ask in a consultation. Is do you understand that you have to actually make money off of these things, and it can't be just for the love of them. All right, so there you go. Enough talking for this week. Ask gardening questions down below, and I'll be back around next week to answer them. Thanks for watching.